All right, welcome to our webinar today. We're gonna wait just a couple more minutes to get a couple more people in here, and then we will get started. I think while we wait, I'll just go ahead and go and do introductions. So today we have on again Dan Carroll and Ron Perkins. Dan, the former owner of Seven Seas Pools and Spas, and Ron, the current owner. And I wanted to have you guys on for this topic because in my conversations with Ron, it became apparent that you had came up with some creative ways to make your deal work for everybody. And so our topic today is structuring a deal when you're selling to an individual. And I think that this kind of falls under the selling to an employee bucket that we've put it in, but I think this applies to family and employees or any kind of individual buyer. So welcome back, guys. I appreciate you doing this again. All right, so we'll get this discussion started here in a second, but please feel free to put any questions or comments in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that those get brought up as we go. So I think my first question to you, Dan, is I think kind of the starting point for figuring out the numbers and how do we structure things and all of that is knowing what you as the current business owner want and need from the sale of your business. And and that includes like the financially, but also the speed of which you want to get out or stay involved, or just how quickly you want your exit to be.
Well, I think the first thing that my wife Connie and I come up with, or had to come up with, was what it took us to live. We have a home in Florida, we have a home here in PA. The business, as with any business, is obviously supporting almost everything. It's paying for your gasoline, it's paying for your insurance, it's paying for your cell phone. So to sit back and take the time, when we decided to do this, it was a matter of, okay, let's get out all the bills. Let's figure out, what everything is costing us. How much do we need a year to continue the lifestyle that we were at? We weren't planning on taking a step back or anything.
Right.
But that's kind of an eye opener when you sit back and figure out what kind of money you're actually taking out of the business. It ends up being a lot more than you'd ever expect.
Sure.
So we had to come up with that number first to get a starting point. And then the next step was to figure out, what is that business actually making? Probably 10 years ago, we started separating out all divisions of the business. We knew pretty much what each one was doing. Ours was kind of not unique, but the thing that wasn't originally going to Ron was the construction side of the business, the in-ground construction. So we had to take that all out of the equation. Here was our total number for the year, but we had to take out all of the expense of all the vehicles, all of the, the labor cost, all of that of the in-ground construction to come up with a, here's what portion of the business we're really trying to sell, so that we can figure out, will this be affordable for Ron to do?
Yeah. And I think, that's the next piece of this, right? What do you need out of it? And then what can the business actually afford to pay you? Because I mean, most of these deals, it's pretty hard for an individual to go down to the bank and get any kind of a loan, SBA loan, whatever it may be, to cover the entire cost of
Right.
buying a business. And so, even if you are getting like pulling out all of your personal capital, mortgaging your house or your retirement, all of that, and going to the bank, it's pretty tough to come up with that number on your own. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand when they first start to buy or sell a business, is that's really hard to do. And a lot of times the owners end up having to, carry the note for a lot of these transactions, if not all of it, at least some of it. And so I feel like that's kind of a hurdle that you sort of have to maybe get over in your mind. Like, you're probably not going to just take your money and run. This is going to be a process where you're paid back.
Well, I think that if the owner is smart, unless they're selling to some corporation, there was no money. I mean, you had no money to
Yeah.
bring. And if I wanted out, I had to make it a way that it was affordable for him, but also not strapping him.
Mhm.
So when you get that pride and kick it to the curb and then sit down and figure out, okay, here's how we make this work. If we want out bad enough, we have to make it work easy enough, for Ron and Lindsay. And I mean, that's a question there, something for him to answer. Did it actually, did we make it that easy? There was no money down. There was no anything like that. It was okay. Can he survive on this amount of money, taking out all the expenses? We projected everything we could. But how much do Connie and I really need out of this? And every deal is going to be structured, I think, a little bit differently. It's going to depend on, do you own the buildings? Do you currently lease the buildings? We had the advantage of having 3 buildings at the time that are, we were going to be able to receive rent from that. So that also meant we didn't have to have, such a large purchase price, I guess, for it, because we would have a long-term rent out of it as well. So
Yeah. The real estate definitely, plays a part in this. But I mean, I know when I bought the magazines, I mean, my boss knew what he was paying me. He knew I didn't have any money to pay him. And and it's the same for you. Like, what you're paying Ron, and it's like there's no way he's stashing away whatever he needs to buy an entire business. So Ron, I mean, you've never bought a business before. I had never bought a business before. I mean, what were some of the things that you were trying to figure out as this was getting started? How did you sort of evaluate, well, this is what he says we can afford, but what do I think we can afford?
Well, I mean, the advantage I had with going in and buying the business is that I knew the business front to back. I mean, I had a lot of years here. I knew what it was producing. I knew what the margins were, and I wasn't fully involved in the back end of the business, but whenever we could actually see all the back end of what was the expenses and cost of everything and running, and seeing what the volume was and what the profitability of the company was, that really made it clear to us that this could be possible. And again, Dan was fair with me going through it, saying, hey, listen, this is what we're looking to get out of it. And this is what's going to be left for you after it's all said and done. And whenever we sat down and calculated it all out, I mean, the numbers made sense. It wasn't like there was any type of anything was hidden or hidden fees.
Well,
or
I think that comes back to like what you just said, is you knew the business. So when we made an offer, it wasn't Greek to him. He knew these numbers are kind of close. They're either way off or not, but you were able to read those numbers. Being an employee into business, that helps. So
having the access for years to see what the business does, seeing the whole picture of what the business generated, and being able to see, okay, this is the breakdown of the expenses that are going to be coming to us, and knowing what revenue we're generating, it really made it easier for us to say, yes, this is feasible. No, this is not. And again, Dan did a great job when he presented it to me, as far as nothing was skewed, because I knew the numbers, like I knew what we were doing. I think if you're going to structure a deal for someone to buy your business out and they aren't involved in it, and you don't necessarily tell them all the honest truth of what the business does, or you inflate it, then you're setting that person up for failure. And in the end, you're really setting your paycheck for your retirement up for failure, because if that person cannot afford to pay you, no matter what number you think you're getting out of the business, you're never going to get that number, because it doesn't really exist. It wasn't realistic to begin with.
Yeah. And I think going back to what you said earlier, Dan, about taking your pride out of it, I'm not sure that business owners are, necessarily trying to pull the wool over the eyes of a buyer. I think we all just think our businesses are worth more than they actually are.
every business owner thinks that they're special, and that they've got this, amazing thing that no one else can replicate. My wife and I had to look at this like, if we wanted out and we gave a price too high to Ron, we were also smart enough to know that all he had to do was go down the road, rent a building, and start from scratch. Within a year, he'd make it. You know, he has that ability. So if you know who you're selling to and you want out, keep that in mind, because it's not that hard to start a business when you have the experience that Ron had with this thing. And he could have done it for a lot less money, but he'd have had to start from scratch, but make it realistic that, okay, hey, he can do this. So,
Yeah.
And in general, I wanted Dan and Connie to have a good retirement. They took care of me. They're setting the deal up. Like, it was just a mutual respect thing of,
Right.
you know, I wanted them to be happy with what they got in the end, and I wanted them to be satisfied because they worked really hard. And in the end, I hope someone does that for me when I go to sell the business, that I can find somebody that I can trust that's going to look at it in the same perspective that I did. Is, all right, yeah, I could pack my stuff up and go down the street and open a building up and start from scratch and start over again and build it up. And yeah, I know I could do it, but in the end, I don't have this experience without Dan and Connie giving me the opportunity. I don't have the connections through the business that they gave me. And it's just not who I was as a person. And it wasn't who he was as a person either, to say, I'm going to screw this guy over, or I'm going to, it was just a mutual respect thing of like, all right, let's make this make sense. And we made every effort possible using the same attorney,
same accountant. So the books were open the entire time.
So it was nobody like asking questions of the other person. The conversations were as a group, and they were transparent, and it made it a comfort level for both parties. I think because we did it that way. If I would have went and got a separate attorney or a separate accountant to start digging, and then it starts turning into, well, they're asking questions and things that necessarily might not be relevant to what's actually going on. But because I was so comfortable with what I knew the business did, it was really an easy decision for us to say, okay, we can make this happen. And again, everything was laid out. It was a very open conversation.
Yeah. So how did you start to put things together and structure everything? Because this is a multifaceted business, right? You've got retail, you've got multiple stores, you've got real estate involved, you've got inventory, and then you also have the construction side and everything that entails that ended up getting put into the deal as well. So, I mean, how did you figure out sort of, how to put things together for each kind of bucket?
Well, I think we had a total number of sales, obviously, total number of expenses. Being that my wife was the bookkeeper, we were able to get to numbers very easily. And when we pulled construction out of it to say, okay, here was X, which I think, was it a quarter of the business or higher? Probably 30%. It was probably 30% of the total numbers. So that's a big drop. But to take the construction sales out of it, the cost of goods for the construction, the cost of the employees, all of the trucks, we had probably 25 vehicles that had to be dealt with. So we had to separate out all of those vehicles. Okay, here's what's left to run the rest of the business. Every one of the vehicles, here's the inventory that's going to be left. So here was a number of how much that was. Here's the employees' expenses. So here was all of our cost of goods left over for the retail, the spa, and the service. Here was the mortgage payments that we had to figure out, okay, here's our mortgage payments, here's our taxes, here's all of our utilities, everything like that. Adding all that up, taking what was involved with current rent rates, realistic rent rates for each one of the buildings, coming up with those numbers. We had to get inventive with the Clarion building because it was so large and in such a depressed area. The rent that we were set up for that property at 24,000 square feet, that's a big nut to cover right there. So we had to be realistic on that. The rent number we set for that building was actually less than this little warehouse that we're sitting in here in Cranberry right now, by a long ways. So we had to be realistic about that. Again, here were all of our expenses. If we were to give up this business, this is what we need to pay for our own personal stuff. Here's what we need to pay for the mortgages and taxes and things like that for the remaining properties. Can that rent, can all of this, here was the projected rent we were thinking for each building. Here was projected sales. okay, Ron, here is what should be left if you remain at the same number that we're doing now.
Mhm.
And I mean, the number it was a fairly decent number.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're way above that now because you've added other items to it. But it was, the initial start was, can he survive at this number? Can we survive with what that, will leave us? And it's come pretty close. There hasn't been a whole lot of surprises for us. Everything's been pretty good with it. So we're not living lavish lifestyles, but we're pretty darn happy. We're beyond happy.
Yeah. Did you own all of your buildings, Dan? at the time?
3 of the 5 we owned. Actually,
Okay.
4 of the 5 we owned. We rented one of the properties. The 4th property was actually one of the original buildings, and we structured that into the deal for Ron at a pretty good number on it, because he was going to need collateral. If he was going to have to go to the bank, you can be in debt all you want for the business, but if you don't own anything, it didn't do any good. So we structured one of the smaller buildings in for that. It was actually the oldest building. And did you end up using that for anything, for collateral or anything like
I
that?
ended up not having to.
Right. The way he was able to structure some of the loans, he ended up buying out the Clarion building then within
6 months.
6 months, and it was we wanted out of the town. We wanted, to be away from that building, but it was a very valuable building. We gave him a pretty good price on it because we wanted gone. But for him to do that in 6 months, you dropped your payment by,
6,000-7,000.
6,000 or 7,000 a month from rent down to owning it. Now he's got collateral sitting in that building. So he made some very smart decisions to avoid paying high rent again on that super large building. He's not ready to buy the 2 other buildings we have yet. I'm not ready to sell them yet because it is our retirement. But by structuring one of the buildings in to help him have immediate collateral, then not even needing it, that was good on his end of it.
Yeah, that's that's a good thing to think about though, because you're right. I mean, what if sales dropped precipitously for whatever reason and you needed a line of credit or something from the bank? You're right. Like they want some collateral. They're not just going to say, they're not going to take your invoices and, give you a whole lot of money for those. So
Don't want anything like that. There's no way around that. They want to see some hard.
Yep. They want your buildings and they want your inventory.
Correct.
So how did you do inventory then? I don't know how, sometimes the inventory is, bought right out. Sometimes it's not. I mean, how did you figure out like how he paid you for that? As he is also selling it at the same time.
Well, I think we did it to try to help. There was a large number of inventory for the retail stores, 5 stores. We had roughly 800,000 of inventory that we had to separate out all the in-ground product that was going to be used up for the pools that still had to be installed last year. Here was 800,000 worth of inventory, not counting spas yet.
Oh, not counting spas?
Not counting spas.
Okay.
So the point became, like you said originally, that should be paid for right up front. Well, how's he going to pay for that right up front? It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Again, we want it out pretty bad, but it was, can we make this affordable? So what do we do with the inventory? Was what
We did two inventory loans. We did a spa inventory loan,
and then the chemicals
and then a chemical supply loans. So spa inventory loan was a 1-year loan. As we sold the spas off, he was basically acting as my bank of like a line of credit, and then we just pay as we delivered them. We paid for them, and then that got rid of that loan within a year.
Right. We carried that for a year. You paid that off faster, and there was no interest or anything like that. We just, as they were sold, we kept a spreadsheet on it, and they sent us, hey, here's what was delivered this month. Here's what was left. And if there was anything left at December of the first year, so the end of the first year, then he would pay that out, by the end of the year. And I think you paid everything by
June, July.
Yeah, it was a great spa year.
Yeah.
He was really cruising through it pretty fast. So those were paid off pretty quick. The inventory we structured for 3 years?
3 years.
We went 3 years on that again. And was there any interest even on that?
I think we were required.
Oh, that's right.
The bank required us on the rates or the
I think it was like 1.2% or
I think it was like
1.9.
2%.
Yeah,
because
just
it
an
was-
odd number.
Now, the rates
Okay.
would be different now. It's based on the
Right.
federal guidelines is what you're required to charge interest. You can't give a loan without charging a minimum rate. It's something
Right,
of that
that's
nature.
right.
The attorneys figured it out. We didn't, we were planning no interest,
Right.
but then they said, hey, you have to charge some interest, but we structured that loan over 3 years.
3
That
years.
way, you're not gonna sell all that inventory necessarily in the first, I mean, you're gonna sell a good chunk of it in the first year, but you're spreading that out. So you're slowly taking it from your profit over the next 3 years to pay that loan off. But I mean,
I mean,
really-
should it have come in the perfect world? Paid immediately or paid within the first year, but that's not gonna happen. Majority of that inventory was probably chemicals, but we had to be realistic. We had to go through and do an inventory of everything, and we'd have always had a pretty accurate inventory system. 95%, maybe 90% accurate. So, I mean, there was some stuff in there that we just kind of had to say, hey, this is really not a real number. We'll use that as our reason to take it out for the 3 years for the payoff, which, you don't get that from a distributor, you don't get that from a manufacturer. So it was again, it was a way to help him be able to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 3-year loan for really inventory that might already be sold, but it's okay. We're fine with
a
that.
smaller buy, they might be able to pay that upfront with a smaller company. If you had $150,000 or $200,000, that they might be able to go to the bank and say, here's the inventory I'm buying, and that they use as collateral or something like that. But to go get, it was somewhere around $800,000 worth of
And
inventory.
part of that inventory was high because the deal was happening January 1st, but we'd already brought in our early buys. We've
Oh,
always been a
sure. Yeah.
purchaser in
Yeah.
advance. That's why COVID never hurt us, because we had our product well in advance. So it's either pay me at 2022 rates or be buying it at the higher rates and hopefully you get it. We've always had inventory on stock. So we've always been high on inventory. So it was better to carry that out.
Yeah. So, you're talking about the inventory and the rent and kind of all of these different things. So, I mean, is Ron making the one giant payment for all of this at once a month, or is it spread out? Like how? I mean, it seems like a lot to keep
One
track
giant
of.
payment, but it's actually probably 8 or 9,
Yeah, it's probably 8 or 9 different loans.
because there's 2 rent payments.
Right.
There's inventory 1. There's
and then there was the asset and the goodwill.
there's other assets and goodwill. So
Sure.
we had to go back to 25 vehicles. I took out probably 10 of them. He ended up purchasing 10 vehicles, trailers, trucks, vans. And okay, here's a fair number on them. Then we knew they weren't all great vehicles, as he knows now. That was probably the biggest part of the business that he was not a part of, is how fast I was always buying vehicles, because we do an awful lot of miles. They wear out pretty quick. If we can keep a vehicle for 3 years, well, some of these vehicles were 8, 9 years old. They, had a lot of miles on them. So we had to be realistic on the price for that. We had to go through the computer systems for 5 stores. There was upwards of 30 computers.
Yeah.
There's furniture, things like that. So we set a price for all of that. That was the FF&E.
Yeah, that's part of the goodwill asset type structure.
So there's a large amount of payments, but because each one is structured for different times. So I think the computers and the vehicles were set up for 10 years.
If they were put in the goodwill. Yep.
So again, a very ridiculously low interest rate. We actually hold the titles on the vehicles. So that's our collateral.
Yeah.
But as he sells them or as he needs them, then we just release them at that time, once they're paid up, and we just continue on. So we had an attorney that was very, I'll call it inventive. Not inventive. I mean, it only makes sense to do it that way, but it's a logical way to do it. It all can't be, hey, a 3-year loan for everything. There's structured out between 3 and 10 years for it. So.
Yeah. I mean, so how, Ron, did it fall then to Lindsay to sort of keep track of everything and make sure that all of this was getting, paid to Dan and Connie when it was
I think we had this conversation at the end of the last meeting.
Yeah, we kind of did.
Yeah. She's not sure why she married me, but yes,
It's just basic bookkeeping. It's just
another bill.
It's just a line item.
It's just a line item on a bill. So it really doesn't. It would be no different than making your mortgage payment every month. It'd be no different than making a car payment. it's all structured and dated. So whenever we know when those are due, we pay them just like any other loan that we have on our real estate that we bought. So it's really no different. It's just as they go away, for me, that's when the business, as that stuff starts getting paid off, that's when the business can really start.
Well, and truly though, the only thing that gets paid off is the vehicles. The inventory is inventory. Every business has to buy inventory. It doesn't make a bit of difference. That's always going to be recurring. So we didn't even factor that in as, okay, what's going to be his monthly expense. It was an advantage that, okay, if we divided $800,000 worth of inventory over 3 years, he's only buying, there's only roughly say 250,000 a year above, plus everything else he had to buy. That's just cost of doing business. So that there's really nothing out of the ordinary there. It was the rent versus what we were already paying in mortgage payments. Our buildings weren't paid off. We still have mortgages on them. So when we decided to come up with our number, here is what we're paying right now. This is how much is left at the end of the year. Okay, if he's paying X amount more for rent to still give us some profit on it, can he survive? That's all part of that process.
Yeah.
But I think the only line items that as they disappear is really the FF&E and the buyout cost to us.
Yep.
Rent's always going to be there. Anything's going to always be there. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's complicated and yet simple.
it's not that difficult if it's open communication, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is we took my down payment, which would be your inventory and things like that, and we structured it into a term that was affordable for the business to pay. So, and we shortened the loan so that way he would be getting his money out faster on the inventory. You can't structure the inventory over the 10 years,
right?
Because that inventory is going to be gone most likely after a year and a half. All that's going to be gone.
Okay.
So it would become it makes the payment less to pay over the 10 years, but ultimately it's kind of a burden on the business for that 10 years that you're slowly paying off that inventory that's gone. Doing it all in 1 year though is also tough too, because you might not necessarily sell all of it in 1 year.
That's where I was just going to.
So it worked out well with a 3-year structure that it made it affordable for us, but yet he's still getting his money out quickly. I mean, not as fast as me writing him a check, but it's coming out in chunks every month that he's getting repaid on that inventory.
You're based on, most of your customers are spa people. So the biggest thing, probably the hardest thing for Ron was, we were coming out of COVID and everyone knows how hard inventory was for spas.
Yeah.
We were jacked up on spas. There was, I think the 156. The deal was 156 spas that we were sitting on inventory that we gave him a year to pay for. And if he didn't sell them, that was going to be tough.
Yeah.
So, and it's not like, hey, we were with Textron or anything to where he just paying interest on it. It wasn't that big a deal, but it changed how he decided to sell. You were selling what you had in the barn. You were really changing how he was doing it and getting rid of that older inventory, which was no older than a year. So
I didn't order any inventory until I got less than 40.
You were down a long way.
So I basically cleared out my warehouses, my stores, and sold everything out of the barn, ran specials, whatever it was.
Right.
And it wasn't like we had to discount and do it. We did it very quickly because we do sell a lot of hot tubs, but it worked out really good to do it that way. And it basically gave me a reset.
Right.
And then I basically started from that point. Manufacturer was asking, hey, when are you going to order tubs? I'm like, when I need them. Right. And I don't need them.
And
right now.
It was nice.
You and every other hot tub retailer out there.
Second year, then he was able to order basically all new stuff.
Yep.
You were able to like you said, reset your floors. You went back and redid a couple of the stores. So you were able to reset an entire new plan with a new product. But it was all due to COVID. We had such a high inventory. If a dealer or an owner is wanting to get out, the spas were actually an advantage for us, having that we had all this money due to us. So again, it wasn't that big of a purchase price. We had a lot of inventory that we've already paid for. So we knew that was coming into us as well. We had to structure our budget. Okay, over the next 10 years, here's our numbers. And for the first couple of years, it's a really nice high number.
Sure.
But the last remaining 7 years, it's not. We just have to be smart about it. So
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, looking back now that, you know, this has been, remind me the years again. How many years are we talking?
Solid year and a half.
Yeah, we're almost
Year and
second year.
three-quarter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
year
yeah.
and three
Okay.
quarter.
Okay. So, I mean, I got a year and a half under your belt. I mean, looking back, is there anything that you would do differently?
Run like hell.
Honestly, I don't think there would have been anything I could have done differently to make it work for both parties.
Sure.
I maybe would have shortened the inventory loan a little bit by a year and done it in 2, but it's irrelevant. I mean, it's fine. I mean, we could have maybe paid that off sooner.
Oh, you're welcome to.
Of course I am. But it makes it nice because it's giving us extra capital to reinvest back. So it gave us, by doing it longer, it actually gave us more capital to invest back into renovating the stores and restructuring how we're doing. I mean, I really sat back and looked at, okay, we have this much inventory. This is how many stores we're just, how many spas we're displaying. How did I looked at it in this way is like, how do I keep that inventory down for the future? So when we restructured the stores and remodeled them, we laid them out differently. So we didn't have to display quite the quantity that we had. So my overhead inventory was able to be controlled a little bit better. For years, we were able to do it. Dan was able to do it because he was able to have the capital
I
to
had
do it.
I had deep pockets, and I had lines of credit that were not lines of credit, but history with businesses that they had no problem giving us large amount of inventory. I would say the best thing that come out of this for you was coming out of 156 spas sitting on the floor at one time. Have you topped 70?
Yeah, I mean, right now on the floor, our inventory to fill the stores prior to the remodels was 105 units. Now we fill our stores with 75.
He's way more efficient. He learned how to become efficient on that. When it wasn't his money, it was very easy to, hey, let's just bring in spas. I was busy doing other stuff. Hey, let's do it. I don't care. It's no big deal. I know he'll sell them. Well, now that it's his money, I think that was a good learning experience. And you're way more efficient on your spas. There's no way around it.
Yeah,
So
it's easy. It's much easier for us to stay ahead of floor planning and stuff like that when we have less units, and it helps free up again more capital to reinvest, bring in new employees, if we need new trucks or things like that, getting that streamlined so you're not having to pay the interest on those hot tubs sitting on your floor. It was a great opportunity for us to really reevaluate the inventory levels in the showrooms. Once we depleted that inventory out, I'm like, do we need this many? And it was really an eye-opening thing where I'm like, if we redo this, yeah, we're spending some money by renovating, but by renovating, we were able to long-term become way more efficient. And it was needed. It just wasn't a necessity whenever Dan was there, because again, he had been in the business for a long time. He had a lot more working capital. It wasn't a burden on him. It actually, again, probably benefited him in the end because it was inventory that he had bought.
right, we had
And
money.
he was able at the end, it was more of like a savings account,
That's a good way to look
of
at it, right?
inventory. He was able to sell off to me and it was going back to him. Where for me, it's a little bit different. I don't want to have that much inventory, that much overhead to be more streamlined, to be more efficient. So,
And as an owner, back to the pride thing, him paying all that inventory back right away doesn't gain me anything. I either have all that money in one pile at one time, or we structure it. It's the same thing. Have it as a longer period of time to help him be able to afford to do it. Again, how bad do you want out? If you make it good for both, all that money up front was not going to do me a bit of good. It served no purpose. So stretch it out.
to answer your question, would I do anything different? Probably not.
Okay.
You could have tweaked that, but honestly, it gave us other advantages. So could it have been done that way? Sure. Was it necessary? Not really.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, you mentioned, it doesn't do you any good to get it all in one chunk. I mean, how much did sort of the taxes that you would have to pay on all of this play into kind of how you spread things out too?
The inventory was already taxed. It was already paid. That was part of the business expense. So, I mean, there was basically $2 million that was tax-free. So I could take it all at once and have a great time, but what are you going to do with that? It didn't make there was no tax advantage to taking it front, because again, it was inventory. The FF&E or the, the goodwill, that goodwill coming all up front, I'm going to pay the taxes all up front or pay it over 10 years. Again, what is better for Ron? What is better for that purchaser? So it's not that big a deal. Too many owners try to avoid taxes.
Yeah.
You got to pay them. Just pay them and move on, but factor that into the deal. Know that you're going to be, paying that kind of money. Just deal with it and budget accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious, talked about it's different, like when you're an employee and the money's not yours versus being the owner. Are there some things, Ron, that you're like, oh, I'm a little bit tighter on how we spend this as the owner versus when I was the manager?
You gotta be.
Well, I understand him more.
Okay.
That's all I need to hear.
I understand him more.
Yeah.
And I understand the frustration that I maybe didn't understand before. And it wasn't because I was ignorant. It was just because you don't know until you know.
You don't know what you're right.
And I think we talked about in the last webinar, it's like when you have your firstborn, everyone's going to tell you any which way and you think you don't know until you know. Until you're experiencing yourself and people are like, I want to buy this product. I'm like, is it going to sell? Is that going to really sell? Are we really going to be able to move this? Or is this going to sit here and collect dust? And so I understand, when I would say, I want to do this project or I want to bring this in, Dan would always pause, hesitate, look at me and say, well, if you want it for Christmas, it's going to be your stocking if you don't sell it.
Right.
So
perfect.
So he had some good sayings along the way that make a lot more sense nowadays than they did prior to.
We were always a healthy business. So we had, not bragging, we had plenty of money, but we never did stupid things. Well, okay, we did a few stupid
We
things.
did a few stupid things.
but we cut them out pretty quick. We learned from our mistakes.
Yeah.
But by being healthy and making those choices,
You could experiment.
he was able to, as an employee, kind of do what he wanted because we knew that he was going to make it work and we had the money to pay for it. Well, once it's now his, does he have those people in place? I think that's got to be the learning curve. Is if they're going to be making choices, now he has to sit back and think, okay, is this the right thing to do? And you're making all the decisions pretty much on your own anyhow, as I did. That's a big curve, a big learning curve. So
yeah, it's definitely a big curve, and you definitely you learn faster whenever it's your money. You definitely pick it up. You definitely pick up what you're putting down quicker, and I've been very lucky because a lot of the staff, 98% of the staff, 99% of the staff stayed that knew the business. So it wasn't like I had a bunch of people that came in and didn't know and were like, we should try this and we should try this. And we're guiding the business away from our core. And because we kept solid to the core, there wasn't, first year, I'm like, hey, we're not going to experiment with anything. We're going to just ride the wave and figure out what makes sense for us and slowly implement new things that we think we can grow.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you didn't need me at all the first year because of that core group of people being there. It wasn't an experiment, and he was able to take off on his own without a whole lot of input because you got the input from those people. That was huge.
Yeah. I mean, that's again, part of what the last webinar was about, was talking about whenever you're getting someone who's structured to do that. That's why it was so important for that person to be the one who hired and had the relationships, the hands-on with the staff that was there, because now, it was like nothing changed for them, other than the name on the door or the name on who was actually the final say. For a lot of years, I mean, I did a lot of stuff and I didn't have to call Dan. Like he's like, don't be an idiot and just do what you think is right. And
run it like it's your own, and that's how I did it. So,
and when I did do something stupid, he did tell me, and I knew. But it wasn't often that I had to get that phone call from him, like, "What are you doing?" And if I explained myself, sometimes we'd agree and sometimes didn't. But in the end, I always respected that if he didn't want to do it, I was like, we're not doing it then. It's
Right, because as the owner, it's your money, and that's the part he's learning now, is when to say no, when to pump the brakes, because is this gonna cost him the money that it was costing me? And I think that's what you've got out of it now, so.
Um, so, sorry, someone knocked at my door and just completely threw me off my game there for a second. I mean, so now that you guys, I was gonna say, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Now that you're sitting on the other side of it, I mean, what has life been like for you, Dan? I think it's good to talk about how the good part of walking away from your business.
I think I should have taken a few bets, because there is a lot of people that didn't figure I could do it. There's no way you can slow down. There's no way you can stop. My wife and I are the happiest that we have ever been. We've been married 35 years and we're having a ball. It's changed. You know, everyone's like, oh, you're going to move to Florida. We have a home in Florida. We've never been in Pennsylvania in the summertime to actually enjoy it, because we were always working. And we love it here. More people need to do it. We were getting kind of miserable. There's no way around it. And Ron will attest to that. We just weren't happy. And if we weren't happy with employees, with customers, not that I was grumpy, we just weren't happy. And if that's the case, you need to sit back and look and say, hey, am I doing any good here? And I don't know if I was doing any good. It was time for us to go. And it was like a light switch. We're having a ball. So we haven't made any major changes. I mean, 0 major changes. We lead the same lifestyle we did. We're ecstatic every day. So I don't know if that's the perfect answer, but that's the answer you're going to get. So
yeah, that's it. No, that's a pretty great answer. I mean, it can be really hard to walk away from something that you've built. And
well, I think for us,
it's good to see former owners thriving and happy and ecstatic on the other side.
But probably one of the big drivers for that is Ron hasn't run the business into the ground. You know, he has taken it to another level, and we can be proud for that. I bought out my mom 25 years ago, and she's like, how are you doing this? How can you possibly go, without the business? Look what happened to me. We're not the same business as we were when I bought you out. And Ron's going to a whole nother level with what he's doing. That I don't have to sit back and worry about, hey, am I going to get my payments? Are things going to go good? What's going to happen? Because if he fails, I'm stuck with a couple buildings. And do I want to go back into the pool business? I don't want that. So for him to be successful, that just makes our life very easy. We don't have to be concerned about that. It's made it much easier.
So we did have a question. He said he has a spa maintenance business, low inventory, just some chemicals, 4 small transit connect cars, vans. They don't do repairs, just maintenance. So he's kind of wondering, how would you figure the price to sell it for? And I wonder if I could answer this one. I think you would look at your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, also known as EBITDA. And then figure out what the multiple is. You can find online, they can kind of give you an idea of the EBITDA multiple you should pay, kind of depending on the type of business that you have too.
The company that we had give us an evaluation back in 2019, his multiplier was 3.7. We were nowhere close to that, not even in the ballpark of that, because it's, again, one of those things that a customer or an owner thinks their business is worth more than it is. Is the person going to be able to continue at the same pace you're on? Are they going to be able to survive? A small service company, with 4 vans, that's a hard one to come up with, but it's how much does he want out of it? We've had a couple pool dealers here that were very small, and they were able to sell out for, half of that number and be very comfortable. But again, they also owned the buildings. They were able to receive rent back, things like that.
Sure.
It is a crapshoot to come up with that number. how do you do that? Like you said, come up with, pre-tax all of this and then multiply that. In a real world, I'm not sure that number works anymore.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, you bring up a good point. It's like, what do you need, and what is someone willing to pay you for it? I mean, there's a little bit of both. And unfortunately, sometimes you're right. You don't know that until you test the waters a little bit.
Right. Sit down and figure out all of your expenses. What all do you want? Come up with a number, and it's somewhere in between, that 3.7 or whatever they come up with that number, but it's, you ultimately you set your number, and if they're not willing to pay it, if they can't afford to pay it, then they're not going to do it, obviously.
Yeah, if you run the books numbers and you're like, they can't make this payment by doing this job and running this business, then you're overpriced.
Right.
Because you can't expect them to make more money than what the business earns and pay that payment and then survive. They will go bankrupt.
Yeah. Are they going to have to? We thought about it as, if Ron only did the numbers we were doing for the past, take COVID out of the equation, we kind of brought it back down, below that. Is that going to be enough for him to survive? Okay, here it is. But can he grow it? So with that service department, are they able to grow that service department to make more money? How aggressive of a buyer do they have? We had an aggressive buyer in Ron. We knew what his capabilities were and knew what he was going to do. So there was obviously growth. Could we have asked for more? Sure. I don't think we'd have got it because he wouldn't have been able to pay for it.
Yeah. And I mean, the first step, as we've gone through this series and talked to a bunch of experts and people who sold their business, I mean, the first thing that it gets said, no matter who I talk to, is that you have to have good books and have your business in order. So, and I think that also helps you figure out what a good number is too. If you're working off good books, you really know what you're making, where, and how, then you can start to really answer those questions in a little bit, make it a little bit easier, probably.
I think for that service department business, that's not easy. It's one portion. We had 3 portions technically: service, retail, and spas. If each one of those departments were profitable, that, you have to look at that. One can't pay for the other one. And I think we were running pretty close. One was relying on a little bit of the other part of it, but you have to, like you said, you have to know, are your books legit? Is each one of these departments making money? So with only being one department, he should be able to see, okay, here's the money I'm making. Here's all of my expenses. Here's what it's doing. Throw a number out. That's not that hard to do, I think, at that point. Yeah. And, see if it works.
I feel like that's the other thing that I have learned as I've talked to people and as we've done the webinars as well, is just that no deal looks the same. There is no formula to follow. It's all very different depending on the business, depending on the owner, depending on the buyer, and everyone's individual needs, which is kind of frustrating. Like, I'm very good at following instructions and checking things off of lists and doing things in the proper order. I have a lot harder time when it's like, you got to figure it out and you don't know how to do it. That's a lot harder.
And then you also got to throw in back to, what's his location? Every location's different. We had depressed towns and we had big money towns. So you have to factor all of that into the play. What is his growth capabilities if he's in a big town? We have a mutual friend in the pool business out in Ohio that is very service oriented, and he is basically reevaluating his business to make it a serviceable or a service sellable company, because it's sign up as many contracts as you can and keep them going. And that's a good number or a good item to offer to even a corporation or an investor. They want to buy things like that when they can see that there's guaranteed money. So
yeah, everyone wants that recurring revenue. So
right.
get those people under contract.
Contract and service departments can do that. And if he's not doing that now, is that something that the new buyer, could do to grow their numbers and create a business that's sellable for them down the road.
Yeah, and he said that they he's followed up and said that they do have lots of opportunity for growth. So
Okay,
that's great.
good.
All right. Well, is there anything else that comes to mind when it comes to putting an actual deal together and getting across the finish line? I mean, what did you guys do to celebrate when the deal closed?
I don't think we did anything.
I don't think we did anything.
I think we went to Longhorn or Roadhouse or something.
He took us out to dinner almost a year later as almost a retirement celebration because
Yeah.
he was busy and we were ready to get out of there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there was no like popping champagne when you
No,
signed on the bottom line or
it
nothing.
wasn't I can't call it a celebration. It was just a natural course of life for us. It was, it was where we were headed. It's what Ron wanted to do. So it was, hey, here's the next step and move on. And I didn't look at it as a celebration, I don't think.
No, I mean, the night we closed, we had dinner before.
Right.
And it was just us and it was nice. It was just us, you
Right.
know, and then, like I said, we planned something. I planned because Dan was still working because it wasn't like the day he sold the business, he was done. He still had contracts and stuff with in-grounds
For the construction
for the
side.
construction side that he had to close up. So he was still working and involved even after we closed the business for almost 8 months.
So we were still
So-
involved with each other.
So we were still involved with each other. It was still a transition for a couple months. But whenever he finished his last in-ground, I invited a lot of the long-term employees and we met them for dinner and we had a really nice evening.
Right. It was
together.
almost a, stroll down memory lane because we had, one of those employees that's his head employee now, basically, that she was 30 years with us. So to be able to, they reminded me of some things that happened long ago that I didn't remember.
It was a good
So
time.
it was a good evening like that. But again, it wasn't just a giant relief for us to get out of the business and for him to take over. It was just a natural progression. So it was a very easy transform from here to there, and it worked out very well.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for telling your story and coming on the webinar twice and being willing to, share everything that you went through and how you did things. I really appreciate you being willing and open to do that.
Hope it was helpful. Again, like you said, there's no real set plan. It just worked as we talked before we, started this afternoon's meeting. Even some big corporate accounts, there's still no real set plan for how these occur. So just get inventive, I guess, and kick pride to the curb is the one thing I'll always tell any owner. Forget about being special. What do you need and how bad do you want out? That's all there is to it.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna end it there. Thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
We'll get this video ready and sent out for the people who couldn't attend. And you guys all have a great day and a great week.
You as well. Thank you very much.